Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Went to K-State, first went to K-State, I was a farm kid, grew up with cattle, started in animal science, and then I took a crops class with Dr. Donnelly, basically agronomy 101. Then after that year, transitioned over into agronomy and then graduated from K-State in 2015 with a consulting and production degree. The summer of 14, interned in Colby, Kansas with Servitech. And then obviously once I graduated in the May of 15, moved to Colby, Kansas and started full-time with Servitech. And then basically worked in Thomas, Logan, Gove, and Sheridan counties, a little bit up into Rollins, but Thomas and Logan probably was the majority of my customers kind of in that part of the world. And then just worked with them from 15 to spring of basically winter of 22. And then in March of 22, went to work for Pivot Bio as commercial agronomist at that point in time. Obviously, Pivot had grown quite a bit, so had the sales side and then obviously expanded into the agronomy team and getting that set up to support, sales and the rest of the stuff. And obviously answering questions with farmers as we expanded and grew the book of business. So.
Yeah. So what made you switch from animal science over to agronomy?
Well, nothing against animal science guys. I always joked with them, and it was something we joked about at K-State too. It was the rancher degree. With animal science, you either went into, a feed sales kind of position, working with dairies and feedlots and stuff like that, or selling mineral. And so obviously the job opportunity was a big part of it. My parents and brother farm in north central Kansas, and then my in-laws farm western Kansas. And, dad joked like, hey, you can come back home, but it's one of the deals. I wanted to see how other people did stuff too. You know what home is, but you like to see what other people do. And then you can be of value and bring stuff back. So, I'm still heavily involved with them, help them quite a bit. But between looking at obviously the job opportunities between animal science and agronomy, was a big part of it. But with agronomy, I always joke with everybody, you kind of get to be the doctor for a corn plant. You don't always get the diagnosis right, but you get to see everything from fertility to diseases to, water management in the irrigation world. Dry land, we can't do it, but that was a big part of it too. You can do a lot of fun stuff. You can do that on the animal side too, but crops was something that I enjoyed a lot. So
Yeah, it's been kind of cool to learn as I dive more into the the basics where a lot of these products are formulated. There's a lot of overlap between animal science and plant science. Whether it's different hormones or just different, might be completely different hormones, but we're still trying to spike something in, when you're talking cattle, it might be something with their stomach. And with the plant, it's a process that plant has with translocating nutrients within itself. So I think the overlap is pretty cool. And definitely when you look at like mineral that you're feeding your cattle and certain deficiencies that, why is that cow over there licking a salt block? Why does it need sodium? And how cattle just know what they need, and plants know what they need too, but they can't pick up their roots, walk over and lick a salt block. So it's kind of some cool similarities between the two. I've found in products and just the functions of the plant and cattle specifically.
Yeah, and that's like the neat thing too. One of the guys that actually has bought some Pivot Bio in western Kansas, he's a nutritionist for one of the feedlots, and he always jokes about like a lot of his research that he did in school and then after school working for K-State was testing like micro products. And so like when I first went to him with like Pivot Bio, of course he's like, with them, they're constantly trying new things in the rumen to see what helps feed efficiency and stuff like that. So like when I approached him with that, he was like, his mind started thinking instantly of what he's done and messed with and like, how are they the same? And then, like anybody, he can be a devil's advocate of like, how can I mess with this and figure out in his rotation too? Because like I joke with a lot of guys like, Iowa, we always hear about like how good things are up there, but like And you think of Kansas and Colorado and some of these like more fringe acres, we can grow some really good yields. We just have to treat it different, and it's one of the deals that it's fun to mess with it and see what we can change, and how things change from farmer A to farmer B across the road, or across the county. I mean, stuff like that's fun to see with guys, and that's one thing too. When I was doing consulting, I mean, I worked with two brothers, thought way different. I mean, both same end goal, raise bushels and be good farmers, but I mean, think way different. So
Yeah, and then just like any industry, that ability to think outside the box and not just be a carbon copy of whatever. I see those differences, with how training's done at a co-op level versus the independent retailer, and I think just that encouragement to think outside the box, do your own thinking, problem solve. A lot of the things that in rural communities we just talk about as common sense. I think really flourish in an independent retail environment.
yeah, and like with that too, like I mean, that's part of the reason that I got, I guess, interested in Pivot Bio. I mean, I had somebody that I knew approach me about it. Of course, I was still in the consulting world, and I mean, I was definitely that deal of when somebody approaches you with something like this, you're like, I mean, I don't know until I see it. And then one of the farmers I worked with in Thomas County, I mean, he tried it and he wouldn't tell me what it was because he kind of knew where I was going to be at with it, because I mean, all these suppliers have something that just does this magical thing. And you're like, we see them, especially when corn prices change, like guys are like, oh yeah, you want to try this, it's going to do something. And so like the first year he did it, I mean, I thought we had a fertilizer on the strip till rig, because I mean, it was just a stark difference between, like, I mean, it was both good corn, but there was like green corn and then there was really green corn. And I thought it was a fertilizer screw up. And so like I pushed him that fall, like, hey, what happened here? And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. And then by year 2, I was like, okay, something is going on here again in the same pivot. And he ran another strip trial with it. And I was like, what is going on? And then by midsummer, he kind of said, well, it's a microbial product. And I instantly was, no way. I don't believe in this deal. And then, the first year we saw a pretty good yield response. Year 2, we saw a good yield response again, but we kind of screwed up on when we got the corn Y dropped, but we still saw a separation. So we're like, this corn's greener, looks better. There's got to be some validity to what they're doing, what they say they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so then by year 3, the same guy that approached me early on about Pivot Bio came to me again and said, hey, we're starting an agronomy team. Would you be interested? And then obviously with me doing agronomy, I was like, well, sure, I'll be open to it. And then, like I said, it was neat to A, see it in person beforehand, and then B, get to go behind the scenes and see what they're really doing, versus just kind of guessing what they're doing. Like it was that deal of there's validity to what they're doing, and then they can, show you. So, but I mean, at the same time, I still challenge, our product. That's something that I do, is like, as an agronomist, like I want it to work, but I also want to show like how it doesn't work, or how I can make it fail.
Yeah, when you put your name behind a product, you kind of get a bad rap, I think, because a lot of the farmers that I've worked closely with in the last 5.5, 6 years are very skeptical. But when you come from an agronomy first mindset, though, they don't always realize that you were the first skeptic. And you were probably more skeptical than they are even at times. And so being an agronomist, I think, gives you kind of a good sense of skepticism. And I mean, we've all, looked at a lot of different fields, and the biggest thing as a crop scout that I've learned is if things look good, then your job goes a lot more smoothly. But when they don't, a lot of times that's when you get the tougher questions, and then you got to figure out the do's and don'ts of certain products or timings or placements. So really being that first skeptic about a product as an agronomist, I think is a really good thing. It's another way we protect our customers too. To see it in the field. It's really easy to cook something up in a lab, and it's really easy to sit at a computer and type up a marketing sheet when you're being fed lines. But to go and see it in the field is, in my opinion, that gave me the most confidence in how to use Pivot Bio's products. So you mentioned the do's and don'ts. So, how can I make it lose? Which is a great question to ask. How do we understand, what all a product provides? Not just from a reduction of synthetic fertilizer, but maybe it's just that the nitrogen application timing. So talk about that a little bit in the do's and don'ts of the products. And I know we started, I guess when we both started with Pivot Bio, it was just proven. So 25-pound product. And now we're proven 40, LIF, and then there's also a G3 for the on-seed and the planter box products. So I guess let's just talk about the 40 pounds and newer products. Okay. So what did you see with Proven 40 out in the field?
So, Proven 40, when it first came about, obviously with any microbial pack, is microbes get along okay in the soil, but they don't always get along together in a box. So, when we first came out with these, it was a box inside of a box. We got 2 bags in there, and then we're tossing that in the soil. And then obviously, basically the Club Ciela, that was our first proven. That was a 25-pound product. Then we figured, okay, now how do we get more out of the one microbe? Do we add something to it, or do we add another microbe to it? And so then that's where Proven 40, we added the Club Ciela or the Cosaconia microbe to it to get our 40-pound product. And so basically them two together working, because with the 25-pound product from one, then roughly 15 pounds out of the other. Because a lot of these we're taking a junior high football player and trying to turn them into an NFL pro athlete.
This Pro Box has enough seed to plant 125 acres of corn. Now, if you wanted to put 40 pounds of nitrogen on those acres, you'd need 1,200 gallons of anhydrous, or 1,500 gallons of UAN, or 5 tons of urea. What if you had the nitrogen you need already on seed? Pivot Bio is the first company to apply nitrogen on seed. The nitrogen you need, now on seed, from Pivot Bio.
Yeah, and that year, what the weather is during that year is, again, we can't control the weather, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Let's spend time on the things we can control. But with the weather, though, that yield goal really does become a moving target. And I just had a grower meeting last week, and that was something that stuck out was, okay, this is our yield goal going into the year, but the fields that had excess nitrogen in Yuma County last year, they were able to capture that because we had cooler, they were able to capture that top end yield on those. Whereas most years it would have been wasted dollars, in a nitrogen program. Yep. But since we had a cooler July and August and got some timely rains in August and September, and then had a long grain fill period into even the first few weeks of October, then all of a sudden it was, okay, we're beating our APH on these fields by 20 bushels. So that yield goal really is a moving target. Okay. And so being in the field, evaluating that the corn crop is really important in season.
Yeah, that's something like we learned as a company too. Like when we first rolled out like our Reese and Evans test, which is our basically infield nitrogen test, where we can take reps and growers out to show them like, hey, this product is doing what it's supposed to. We learned with them numbers when we went out and did those. Like there was, with the person coming back was, I think right at under 60%. But if we could take them out to the field and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and show them plants and stuff like that, there was like an 80% chance that they come back. So like that hands-on, touch point of, we sell the product, then we go out and show them validity of what it's doing is, huge for both the reps and, everybody that's, working with our product. So.
And again, it's hard in the biological space because you're almost forced to do it because of the increased skepticism. And not that the skepticism shouldn't exist. There's a lot of products out there that are overhyped or overclaim the benefits they truly provide. But I don't know very many people that are selling 32 to a guy that go out to the field and explain to them, hey, this is what your wide drop pass did. A lot of that we've just grown comfortable with over the years because that's the way we've always done it. And so I think biological products are held to a higher standard.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Because like for me, I was 100% in that category of like there's no way this is going to work. And then I got to see it work, and I'm like, okay. But then like you said, as agronomists, we get to see it, and we're big skeptics of it. Now we got to take it to you and say, hey, like, this is something you need to try on your farm, because it's going to help you as a grower, and then me as a rep or me as an agronomist to help you become better. And that's, that's our end goal with it. But like you said, skepticism is big, because there's always something new, shiny, that could be that silver bullet. But making it work for everybody is a tough too. But nitrogen, when you look at the whole story of nitrogen, like, it's changed a lot, and then our yields in the last 50 years have grown a lot too. So helping them to obviously understand what fertilizer is, and then mess with our NUEs and placing products and stuff like that to improve their farm is big. But that touch point is very big for agronomists and everybody. So
Right. And even though that plant might be able to take up more nitrogen, it's still eventually, within the plant, it's trying to make protein and starches out of that nitrogen. So the form of nitrogen really matters too. And as we start climbing into higher yields, that process takes more plant energy. So if you're using more plant energy, to really keep your NUE at what your goal was maybe 15 years ago, you actually have to have more uptake of other nutrients as well, which is, I think, a big part of why Pivot Bio added the methylotropes in the G3 products. So let's talk about some of the don'ts. Like, where have you seen Pivot Bio, I guess, underperform, or not? Maybe underperform's a bad way to put it. Maybe just where you push the product or what was expected out of the product, maybe a little bit too far.
I'll try to hit a few of them, but I mean, we got some guys where, I mean, they're going to run this product as a standalone only product, and there's some years where it'll work great, especially in the more arid world, where 40 pounds might get us to that end goal, and that's all we need. Now all of a sudden, then it takes off raining and the corn needs more than that. I mean, it can hurt us.
So by standalone, you mean the sole source of nitrogen applied to the crop.
So basically, they're looking at their carryover numbers and their soil sample, saying, hey, I got this much. I think 40 pounds is going to be all I need. And then, I mean, sometimes in that scenario too is some guys are looking at it. I mean, you don't ever want to be in this category, but insurance game of like, hey, we're going to try to spoon feed a dry land crop. We're going to only put this on in early season, and then come wheat harvest, if things are looking pretty good, we'll come back and Y drop, or even earlier than that, they'll come on coulter on, another 50 or 60 pounds, depending on what they need for what that environment at that point in time is showing. Is this 100 bushel corn, 120? In our dry land world, I'm with that thing. And then, like you brought up earlier, when we the laws of the limiting nutrient, like there's some scenarios where like we've ran into potassium issues. Like, I don't care how you place the product or where you place the product, if we're showing a potassium deficiency, because nitrogen and potassium have a very close relationship. And like we have some of these where, I mean, a guy will run it and say, well, I didn't see anything. And you look at his potassium levels and you go, ooh, we got another problem here. And that's, hurting our nitrogen. And then it's not showing that response. And then like some of those guys where we've got them to like, hey, let's run a little potassium and then run the Pivot Bio, we saw really good responses out of it. And so getting every person to do that, depending on, what their pocketbook is for fertility program, changes. But I mean, those two are big out of it. And then obviously, as far as sometimes when it comes to the LIF product, there's certain products we don't mix with.
Yeah, I would say very few times I've not been able to find the reason why it didn't, quote unquote, work for a customer. Maybe nitrogen wasn't their limiting factor. I find that one often. I would say probably the second most common, reason we saw, subpar results on Proven 40 in corn would be we mixed it with something, or we set the box of LIF out in the sun. Or, and once you start asking those questions, you kind of hold them more accountable, and then a lot of times it's pretty easy to figure out okay, this is why we didn't have a successful trial.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard weeding through those trials and, really having confidence in if you're releasing good data or if there's something that skewed it. There was actually one trial I threw out in 2024 because we reduced other nutrients more than just the nitrogen. It had 10 pounds of sulfur less too. So there's all these other variables too, just in verifying that data that I think is important to know what you're testing, and not having extra variables in there that can skew yield at the end of the day.
And sulfur has been a huge one too that we've noticed too. Is like, if a guy's doing that wide drop or that coulter pass, he'll put 10 pounds in there, and then that's when he's doing his reduction of that 40 pounds. He's not going to put that sulfur on the treated corn. And I mean, I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, we're going to get beat in that scenario if they cut the sulfur too. I mean, it's something that we, as basically in my territory, and then a company as a whole across, like just in our agronomy, or basically our agronomy group that I work under, and then the whole company, it's like in a heartbeat you have those. And that's what, farmer trials are fun because you see a wide array of how people are going to do things. And then sometimes with trials, we have to kick them out too, because when it comes go time for farmers, sometimes we're going as fast as we can, as hard as we can. And if you get one rain delay or, it's something happens, if things get pushed back a week, I mean, our trials are hard. And that's something as a company too that we've done is like, we can put agronomist notes in there, like with our proven it results, we can put our notes in there of like, hey, this is why this one looked good. This is why this one didn't look good. And like, so sometimes, hopefully everybody's always open-minded to hear why it didn't work. But I mean, that's a huge part of it. So
yes, we've talked a lot about corn, and I know Pivot Bio started selling return OS on wheat just here in the last couple of years. But I want to talk a little bit about that because I think placement and how you get that product to succeed is very different than what you do with the proven G3 on corn. So what have you seen on the wheat?
So with Return, which is basically our 25-pound product that we're running on small grains. I mean, winter wheat is a big part in this geography. With it, the difference is, like we're planting wheat in the fall, roughly September 10th to October 30th some years, depending on where you're at, if it's irrigated or dry land. And then we have that overwintering phase when the wheat goes dormant, and then obviously coming into that springtime. So like with a Return 25-pound product in the fall, roughly they're shooting for 30 to 40 pounds or 20 to 40 pounds of N for that wheat. So like that's kind of how we've been placing that product of like, hey, we can fill that fall window, but by the time you overwinter and the microbes are, running their life cycle, it's not going to carry over till that next spring. And so like we've done lots of different trials with it. And we have some neat, basically time-lapse cameras that we did in Kansas 2 years ago by Leota, where we did the fall planting, drilling, did the 25-pound reduction, then and then obviously went through the whole growing season. And then when we came down to the end, I mean, it was a minimal difference on yield. I mean, it was like 1.3, very, very little. And it was kind of it was a wet year, so the wheat did better than anticipated. But I mean, it was a year that, we did that reduction in the fall. It covered that window, helped with tillering. And I think when we did the tiller counts, there was roughly a 1 or 1.2 tiller difference on the counts, if I remember right off the top of my head, to where we had set that tiller. And then anybody that works with a lot of small grains, wheat especially, is like tillering is huge for us, because if we can get as many tillers set in that fall before winter, because when we come into that springtime, when that wheat greens up, it's flipped that switch, went through that overwintering phase where it goes, okay, I went from vegetative to now I got to produce grain. So a lot of times in the spring, I think the rough rule of thumb was maybe 1 or 2 tillers, maybe. So, if like in the fall, if we can get 3 to 5 tillers set on that plant versus 1 to 3, it is huge. So if we can treat it, get that extra tiller set, and then overwinter it, and then go from there, that's huge. So, and then like with the fall deal too, we've set some guys up with like some fall grazing stuff because we can increase that biomass. So we have some guys that they're not really too worried about the end production on that side of it. They're looking at it as a biomass deal. If I can put some more calves out here and graze it a little bit longer. I mean,
Right.
that's how some guys treat it, which is fine. Depending on, like I said, how it works for that farmer. Everyone's going to be different on it, what their end goal is. So
here's how Pivot Bio microbes work. Our microbial products capture nitrogen from the air, convert it to a form the plant can use, and provide nitrogen fertilizer directly to the crop all season long.
The important thing to me as far as the fall tillers is that's where a lot of your yield comes from in wheat. I think wheat functions a little differently than corn. Whereas if we get a corn tiller, it's kind of I like to use the analogy of that's just another gas tank. Okay, it's reserve, and it can suck that other tiller back in if it's running short on something, and it will essentially cannibalize that to put more yield, more nutrients, whatever it's lacking, into that primary ear. But with wheat, once we get those spring tillers, a lot of times those just end up being our sucker heads, and it will actually take away some of the fruit fill, or some of the berries filling on that primary head with wheat. So really the yield that we like to see on wheat is the fall tillering. That's where a lot of the yield is made, is from those fall tillers.
Yep, exactly. Because that's what, like a lot of times, you'll see a guy go put maybe some anhydrous on in the basically June, July, after he's kind of pulled his soil samples in August, and then, he's putting everything up front. And then if he can, versus putting it on come springtime, or, before we start green up when he really needs it. I've seen sometimes he's loading that gas tank up so early that by the time it gets to next spring, if we get wet rain or wet fall, wet winter, he's losing some of that in, versus, if he can maybe take some of that, move to the springtime, run return in the fall, fill that 25-pound bucket, and then put the rest on later. I mean, it is big. So
yeah, and it fits well with wheat in our area too. In an arid climate, I mean, 10 to 15 inches of rainfall, and you don't know if you're going to get that in season or not. And I think it works well because a lot of times the nitrogen you put out in the fall on wheat or rye or triticale, barley, oats, some other small grains grown in our area, and it really is just to get that tillering aspect in the fall. But your overall nitrogen decision of, okay, how many pounds am I going to apply? That's usually better made based on fall and winter moisture in the spring. Okay, maybe I'm just done with nitrogen at that point, or maybe we had some good moisture and really good stand, didn't freeze in late May and have some winter kill, or that springtime nitrogen decision is always nice to make. And so I think that kind of gives you a little bit of time to decide, okay, how much nitrogen do I want to apply? I'm going to put out what I need in the fall with the microbes to get that fall tillering bump. And then I could be applying 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen in a top dress scenario or a green up scenario in the spring. Or I might just say, no, I don't have enough moisture in the profile. Maybe I had a stand reduction with some winter kill or some frost damage, and I just want to be done applying nitrogen for that year. Or maybe I'm going to tear the weed out and go in with a different spring crop. Yeah. So I think that's probably where I've seen Return OS fit the best in wheat, is that it buys you an extra 6 months to make that nitrogen decision.
Yep. I mean, any of us that grow weed or are around wheat, we try to kill it 10 times to get it to harvest. And, sometimes we might kill it 2 or 3 times in the fall, it seems like, and then that stuff will hang on. And then also we'll get a rain in May, and we're like, we might actually have something here. And so that's, like you said, giving us a chance to look at things based on economics and where things are sitting at. Like, okay, might have a chance to crop, or, like you said, a couple years ago, if you guys were doing that, if wheat, wasn't really penciling, they went ahead and sprayed it out and put, milo, late milo, or basically milo into it, or late corn, looking to basically which one was the most profitable for them and how they could do it. So, and they didn't have too much into it to where it's going to, hurt them. So.
Right. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit as far as what exactly, we can expect from Pivot Bio's products, how they best fit into different nitrogen programs, and how that varies between the crops. So we might have to do another one of these.
That's fine.